Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the chilling evidence behind some of history's most notorious, baffling, unsolved mysteries. For decades, and in some cases, literally centuries, these phantoms have completely slipped through the cracks of justice. But as you're about to see, we are at a fascinating turning point. Modern science is finally, incredibly, catching up with the past. Let's get right into it. Just imagine opening your morning paper in 1919 and reading those exact words. This chilling taunt was penned by a terrifying figure known only as the Axeman of New Orleans. He brazenly mocked the public, slipped right through the fingers of local police, and then just vanished. He claimed to be a demon, but he was very, very real, and he left a horrific trail of brutalized families in his wake. It really is the ultimate investigative question, isn't it? How do people commit such absolute atrocities and then just disappear into thin air? Well, today we're going to examine the actual crime scenes, we'll dive into the psychological suspect profiles, and we'll analyze the physical evidence that defined these historic mysteries. We're going to look at the bizarre clues they left behind and the theories that have kept detectives awake at night for generations. All right, let's start with Section 1, Phantoms of the Streets. We'll be looking at public terror in London, New Orleans, and Cleveland. Take a look at the data here. These are the canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper from back in 1888. These particular phantoms preyed on highly vulnerable targets in public spaces, spreading absolute panic while basically hiding in plain sight. These were 5 impoverished women, killed between August and November in London's Whitechapel district. What's crucial to notice here is the clear, undeniable pattern of escalating brutality. From Marianne Nichols to Mary Jane Kelly, whose body was left almost completely unrecognizable, the Ripper's post-mortem mutilation showed a deep, terrifying rage and a severe escalation in violence. You know what makes the Ripper so incredibly baffling? He completely breaks the mold. When we look at modern criminal profiling, we usually put killers into 2 buckets, organized or disorganized. But Jack the Ripper? He was somehow both. He carefully selected his victims and sent these highly calculated, taunting letters to the police, which are classic hallmarks of an organized offender. Yet, if you look at the extreme overkill and frenzied mutilation at the crime scenes, that points to a highly disorganized, chaotic mind. It's a total contradiction, and it's exactly what baffled investigators from day one. Okay, crossing the Atlantic over to New Orleans, we find another phantom, the Axeman. And his methodology was just bizarre. He terrorized Italian-American families between 1917 and 1919. He would literally chisel away a panel on the back door just to get inside, and then, shockingly, he'd attack the sleeping residents using their very own axes. Robbery was never the motive. Nothing was ever stolen. And most famously, he wrote a letter promising he'd spare anyone whose home was filled with the sounds of a jazz band. So naturally, the entire city played jazz that night, and no one was killed. Fast forward a couple of decades to the Great Depression in Cleveland. A killer known as the Mad Butcher was leaving dismembered victims in an impoverished area called Kingsbury Run. Famed untouchable lawman Elliot Ness actually hunted this killer, eventually zeroing in on 2 prime suspects. First up was Frank Dolezal, who confessed under intense pressure but later supposedly took his own life in jail. But then there's Dr. Francis Sweeney. He was a World War I veteran who had conducted field amputations. Sweeney's surgical skills combined with a severe mental decline made him Ness's absolute top suspect. But he was never officially charged, and the butcher was never actually caught. Moving on to Section 2, Terror in the Sanctuary, when the home becomes a crime scene. So we're shifting away from the dark public streets to look at the horror that unfolds in the one place we all assume is safe, the family home. When that sanctuary is violated, the psychological impact is just profound. And there are some truly terrifying similarities between 2 of the most infamous home invasions in history. Take the Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany in 1922. An entire family was lured to their barn and struck down with a mattock. The killer then shockingly lived in the house with the corpses for 3 whole days. Contrast that with the Villisca axe murders in Iowa in 1912. Again, a whole family plus 2 guests, bludgeoned in their sleep by a transient killer who then methodically locked the doors and covered all the mirrors. But it's the highly specific clues left behind at these farmhouses that reveal some extremely strange behavior. At Hinterkaifeck, months before the murders even happened, the family found a weird Munich newspaper they didn't subscribe to. And after the killings, the murderer actually stayed to feed the livestock and eat the family's food. Meanwhile, over in Villisca, investigators found a strange keychain that didn't belong to anyone in the family,
along with a gas lamp where the killer had methodically removed the glass chimney and turned it down to the dimmest possible setting. These bizarre post-murder rituals just leave us with way more questions than answers.
Fast forward to Christmas 1996 in Boulder, Colorado. This is a crime scene that remains incredibly controversial to this day. Investigators were completely thrown by this unusually long, 2.5-page ransom note left at the home of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey. What's so strange about it is that the note seemingly echoed dialogue from popular 90s kidnapping movies like Ransom and Speed, dramatically demanding the family follow instructions to the letter.
The real sticking point in the Ramsey case is just how conflicting the physical evidence is. On one hand, the ransom note demanded exactly $118,000. That's a highly specific sum that perfectly matched her father John's private Christmas bonus. And the note was written using a pen and notepad found right there inside the house. This obviously led police to initially suspect the parents might have staged the scene. But on the flip side, detectives found an unidentified boot mark next to the body and a broken basement window with a suitcase positioned under it, heavily suggesting an intruder. But wait. Critics are quick to point out that there were intact cobwebs on that very same broken window. How does an intruder climb through a window without breaking the cobwebs? It's a true forensic paradox.
Which brings us to Section 3, the unidentified and nameless, reclaiming the victims.
We spend a lot of time in true crime fixating on the minds of the killers, right? But we also have these massive cases defined by the tragic anonymity of the victims. Because before you can find a killer, you usually have to figure out who the victim even is. Just look at the timeline of the West Mesa murders in Albuquerque. Between 2001 and 2005, a killer dubbed the Bone Collector buried the remains of 11 women out in the desert. In an eerie twist of fate, a massive housing development was planned right over that exact burial site. When the housing market crashed in 2006, construction just halted. And it wasn't until 2009 that a woman walking her dog accidentally discovered a human bone, finally exposing the secret mass grave to the world.
Now, nobody has been officially charged yet, but investigators have focused heavily on 2 prime suspects. First is Lorenzo Montoya. He lived just 3 miles from the site, and there were literally dirt trails leading directly from his trailer to the mesa. In 2006, he was actually killed while trying to dispose of the body of a strangled sex worker. Then you have Joseph Blea, a known, highly prolific serial rapist. Astonishingly, a tree tag from a specific nursery he frequented was found right there at the mass grave. Both men have incredibly violent histories that make them highly suspicious, but tying them definitively to the site, that remains a massive hurdle.
Moving up to Philly, we have what is arguably one of the most heartbreaking mysteries in American history. In February 1957, the body of a young, severely malnourished little boy was found wrapped in a plaid blanket, discarded inside a cardboard JCPenney bassinet box in the woods. He had been beaten to death, and his body was covered in these distinct surgical scars. For decades, he was known simply as America's Unknown Child or the Boy in the Box. Despite posters with his face being plastered all over the city and the entire country, no one ever came forward to claim him. For over half a century, it really felt like cases such as the Boy in the Box and Jack the Ripper were just locked away in the history books, permanently destined to remain unsolved. But as we're about to see, the investigative landscape has radically changed. The shadows are finally starting to lift.
Section 4, Science Solves the Unsolvable. We're looking at the unbelievable power of DNA and genetic genealogy.
Let's explore how modern forensic science is literally pulling off the impossible, piercing through the darkness of these historic cold cases and rewriting history. After the Boy in the Box was discovered in 1957, the trail went completely cold. But in 1998, his body was exhumed, and investigators miraculously managed to extract a DNA sample from a tooth. Using cutting-edge investigative genetic genealogy, which is where they cross-reference DNA profiles with public family trees, genealogists finally uncovered his identity in 2021. And in late 2022, Philadelphia police proudly announced his real name to the world, Joseph Augustus Zarelli.
It took exactly 65 years. Just let that sink in for a second. For 65 years, he was an unknown, nameless victim. But science gave Joseph Augustus Zarelli his name back. And what's absolutely crucial here is that this transitions his case from a mere identification problem right back into an active, ongoing homicide investigation. Police are now actively tracking down his living relatives to find out exactly what happened in that house back in 1957.
And get this, even a case from 1888 isn't immune to modern science.
For well over a century, Jack the Ripper was the ultimate phantom, right? Well, recent DNA analysis on a silk shawl found at the crime scene of victim Catherine Ados provided a 100% match to Aaron Kosminski. He was a Polish barber who lived right there in Whitechapel, and get this, he was actually a police suspect at the time. Science is literally reaching back into the Victorian era to unmask history's most infamous monster.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a pretty profound question. If Jack the Ripper can be identified after 130 years, and if the boy in the box can get his name back after 65 years, the rules of the game have officially changed. The perpetrators of the past are no longer safe in their graves. So, whose dark secrets will the laboratory reveal next? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep your curiosity alive.